You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your hosts, Andrew Chang and Justin Godwin.
All right. Bills Mafia. Welcome into another episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Buffalo Fanbase Podcast Network. My name is Justin, and I will be your host today. And I just want to start off the top of the show and just say 2 weeks. We are inside of 2 weeks of preseason football. We got the first week of training camp under our belts, and I'm in this time of year where I'm simultaneously feel like football ended like an eternity ago, but also like that it just ended and we didn't really miss a beat. So this is kind of my favorite time of the year, off-season wise, where we're really gearing up and we're right on the fringe of, that 2 weeks happens before you even know it. I'll say this on the show again. I've said it before. For everything that's said about preseason football, I love it, and especially with a team like this that we have that's established, kind of on both sides of the ball, and we kind of know what we have in the team. So there's really a lot of time to start looking at the depth pieces that we've added, the draft picks, just some of those players that round out the roster and can be looking to have a big impact on the future of this team. So kind of outside of, injury possibilities, I love seeing the preseason. I know it's not the greatest brand of football, but I'm the type of guy that'll sit down and I'll watch all 4 quarters start to finish of a preseason game. So getting pretty hyped for that. Just a little housekeeping at the top of this show as well. So I'm recording this on Sunday, July 31st it would be. So next week, your boy doing a big thing, tying the knot on August 7th. And partner in crime, Andrew, is also out of town for a wedding. So we're going to try to get a guest host in here and make sure that this show is coming to you. But as of right now, just keep an eyeball out. Not sure exactly what's going to happen for next week's episode, but we're going to do everything we can to bring something to you. So I want to start out today. Obviously, we're talking a little bit about training camp, kind of what's been going on, and right off the top, we got to talk about the skirmish at the end of Saturday's practice. And I just want to lead off with this because I see it everywhere. It's on social media. It's, every Bills writer's talking about it. The videos everywhere. And that, if you haven't seen it, it was a little dust up between Josh Allen, of all people, and Jordan Phillips. And, I've seen a lot of people so concerned that Josh Allen's involved in it and, the worry about injuries and whatnot. So this type of thing, I don't shed too much light on. These guys have been out of football for a couple months. They're seeing the same guys time after time. They're a week in. It's hot out there. They're away from their families. Their whole environment's changed. So we see this across the league every year. Some tensions boil up and things like this happen. And when I initially saw this, I was like, I don't care about the skirmishes that happen, but I hate that Josh Allen was involved in it. And the more I kind of stewed on it and started thinking about it, I actually kind of love that Josh Allen was involved in it. What I don't love is, if you've seen the video at the end of it, I don't even know who the players were. They looked like some superheroes coming in, getting this running start and jumping 5 yards to get onto the pile. I don't love that. That's, to me, how somebody can kind of fall weird, get a knee rolled up on, and then we're talking about, the chance of actual injuries. But as far as like the pushing and shoving goes, From what I could tell, it looked like Jordan Phillips tried to get a little shove in on Josh Allen at the end of the play, and Allen turned around and said, you're not going to do that. I'm not that dude. And for me, that kind of sets the tone for the offense right from their leader in Josh. And he's not this quarterback that is frail and needs to be protected in the pocket and, won't go to bat for himself. He turned right around and, Jordan Phillips isn't a little dude and got right in his face. It wasn't anybody else fighting his battle for him. It was, if we're doing this, we're doing this. And I like seeing that tone set on the offensive side of the ball, in particular from the quarterback. The defense is usually, thought of as, these bangers, these hard hitters, these tough guys. And not that you don't have that on offense, but, I mean, how often do you see QB1 turn around and ready for that smoke with a defensive lineman? So taking the possibility of injury out of the situation, I love seeing that from my quarterback. And speaking of injuries, we had a bit of an injury scare with Micah Hyde. Now we see it looks like it's not as serious as it was initially thought it might be. He's listed as day-to-day on the injury report, which under McDermott, to my knowledge, it seems pretty accurate when he gives his injury reports that he's not really putting timetables on it to tell you what you want to hear. If it's week to week, call it about a 2 to 4 week injury. If it's day to day, it's usually about a week-long thing. And if we see him sit out a little bit longer right now, Hyde's a veteran in this league. We know what he's capable of on the field. We know what he does in this defense. I'm not going to be overly concerned about it, even if they elected to keep him out of some of the preseason game work. I think that's a position on this roster that's very well solidified, and the depth behind it is a little bit concerning. So I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if he really takes his time to get back right 100%, make sure he's there for the season opener. But we do have, I would say, kind of an interesting amount of injuries on the report right now for kind of the light first week of training camp. Just list off some of the players there. We have Jake Kumaro on the injury report with soreness. Crowder, also soreness. Roger Saffold, obviously dealing with a rib injury from a car accident. Daquan Jones has been limited. Ryan Bates and Spencer Brown listed with undisclosed injuries. So I guess the bright side here is that, as far as we can tell, it doesn't seem like anything too serious, anything should be lingering on. But we have seen with this coaching staff, they err on the side of caution with injuries. So these guys are probably going to miss some time and make sure, they're really 100%. There's not really any point in pushing things too much right now. I think most of those guys are pretty solidly on the roster, so it's not like they're using this camp to really try to solidify a spot on the team. So we'll see what happens with those injuries. A little bit concerning, but overall, I would say I'm not too concerned yet. So for me, this training camp, and I think this kind of goes back to last year, maybe the last 2 years, I'm really enjoying the vibe of the training camp. And what I mean in that sense is, for how many years we saw the defense just come in and really take control and just dominating during training camps. And I was always kind of thinking to myself, like, I thought we have the offense kind of put together, so maybe our defense is just that good. Maybe playing against this good of a defense every day is going to make that offense better. And it never really seemed to shake out that way. It was kind of just defense was dominating training camp because the defense was better and the offense wasn't that great. And what I like about the last, I'll say 2-3 years of seeing the Bills training camp is it's a battle out there, and each side of the ball is making plays. We've seen days where the defense is a little bit more dominant, the offense is a little bit more dominant. But, I mean, this is day in and day out in practice sessions, kind of a dogfight, and I think that really is a good way to get ready for the season. And when you have a roster this talented, it's the old adage of iron sharpens iron. You know, we had the number one defense last year. We had a great offense last year. We've added pieces, and these pieces that are getting added in are getting added into that high level of competition. So I, as much fun as it is to see this time of year, like Josh Allen having a ridiculous day at practice and throwing 5 touchdowns or whatever the case may be, I feel like that gets reported on more than, the defense. Scoring touchdowns is sexy. But it's really good to see the balance and feel like both sides of the ball are really kind of at a similar level, because you do need both sides of the ball to be winning football games. My favorite camp battle that has emerged so far in this training camp has to be the slot receiver battle. And as you mentioned, Jamison Crowder, he's been dealing with some soreness since the first day of training camp. And that's kind of left the door open for some of these guys that I would say I initially had behind him on the roster. And Isaiah McKenzie, I've talked about in the offseason, they gave him a contract extension, but it wasn't, this huge deal, and kind of how limited he's been in the passing game since he's been on the team. He's kind of been this gadget guy, return guy, and I remember saying, if he wasn't able to solidify the return duties, I didn't see really a path to him making this roster. And with Crowder missing time, we've seen McKenzie get some more run, and it really looks like he's developing like this great chemistry with Josh Allen. And granted, he still kind of has his whole body of work in the NFL, where he's kind of been that gadget guy, return guy. But I think through part of the end of last year and through training camp thus far, I think we're really seeing him start emerging as a weapon in the passing game, and I do still believe that that's Crowder's spot to lose. But the more time that he misses and the more impact McKenzie's able to make, I don't think it's as cut and dry as like, Crowder, you're the starter. If you miss any time, McKenzie's your replacement. I think it opens up more of a conversation about, McKenzie was doing his thing. How do we make sure that he's getting his touches? Maybe it's kind of a split roles in the slot there. So interesting to watch how that's developing, and obviously we haven't really seen Crowder yet. But I feel like this is part of Josh starting to elevate the players around him, where McKenzie's kind of been buried on the depth chart behind guys like Cole Beasley. And we saw this early on with Josh where, he was kind of still on the beginning of his development, and they brought in veterans like Smoke, Cole Beasley. They brought in these guys to try to kind of help his development. And now Josh has gotten to this level in his career that you can bring up a guy like Isaiah McKenzie, and who knows, maybe even rookie Khalil Shakir, and Josh Allen can make those players better. And speaking of Khalil Shakir, also hearing a lot of buzz about him out of camp, 5th round rookie. he factors into that mix at the slot or the slot receiver position, and I think he's just being a draft pick, having some return abilities. I think he's a pretty strong candidate to be on the active roster, and this is again very similar to Isaiah McKenzie. With the more time Crowder misses, the more chances that these guys have to go out there and showcase what they have and get some extra reps with the ones that they probably wouldn't have gotten. Now, it sounds like Shakir's mostly running with the twos right now, which isn't unexpected to me. McDermott really likes to make guys earn their spot on this roster, and nothing's handed over. But for me, if the reports keep coming about this development of Shakir and he makes it hard to ignore, I don't think it's likely that Crowder ends up on the outs. We did just bring him in, give him a contract. He's kind of a veteran presence in the locker room, but it's not like they went out and gave him, a 2-year, $20 million fully guaranteed contract. I believe it's like a 1-year, $2 million contract with like a signing bonus in there. So, I mean, if these two players are really able to shine throughout training camp, and Crowder's going to have some ground to make up in my eyes. So, I'm not calling for it to happen. I'm not saying it will. I'm not saying I want it to. But if these guys are able to keep coming in and day out and make significant impacts, it might end up being Crowder on the outside looking in. Like I said, with this roster and how much talent it has, how much depth it has, some of the young guys coming up, I mean, we're still not even talking about like a Marquez Stevenson, how he could factor into the mix. I just think that this team is going to put the best 53 out there. I think Bean knows that this is a very real chance at a Super Bowl year, and if he went out and made a signing and it cost him $2 million and he thinks it was a mistake, I don't think he's going to be afraid to cut bait on that if the talent's too much there. Do feel like I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here and reading a little bit too much into this, because like I said, we haven't really seen Crowder, and he's somebody that I was very excited with the signing for. So hopefully he's back out there soon, and this competition that's already been my favorite just gets that much spicier. As far as the run game goes, we've seen, in particular, James Cook and Devin Singletary being pretty heavily involved in the passing game. And, it's just training camp, but maybe this is a little bit of a tip of the cap to what Dorsey's planning on doing with this offense. And I think that makes sense in the draft pick of Cook, where we kind of had this player in Singletary who's kind of the do-it-all guy. He catches passes, he's takes the majority of the carries. I think this is going to kind of lend itself more to specialized roles out of the backfield and a continuation of the running back by committee. I think we see Singletary get the bulk of the work still. Cook come in and get a lot of pass catching opportunities, maybe some stretch plays, tosses, things like that. And we still see Zach Moss in kind of that between the tackles, tough yardage, salt away a lead type of role. And I like having that different skill set of players. My only concern with that is I get concerned with the chance of it getting predictable. So that's, for me, it's going to be interesting to see how Dorsey deploys these players and how he kind of hides what he's doing. If Josh lines up in a shotgun with Cook in the backfield, defenses are going to kind of key in on, maybe that's a pass route versus, if Singletary's back there, they're expecting more run. I think Singletary kind of gives you the question of he could run or he could catch. And not to say the other guys can't do that as well, just knowing what they kind of specialize in. I think it tips the hand a little bit. I don't want to rule out Dorsey being creative enough to overcome that predictability. So I'm going to wait and see what happens there. But so far, hearing some pretty good things out of the backfield. And then we'll wrap it up with our guy Josh. And it was on day 4 of training camp. Reported that he had at least 7 touchdowns in the 11-11 work, which is kind of a ridiculous number. What I like seeing with this more than just kind of Josh being Josh is the way the ball was distributed for these 7 touchdowns. And I don't have numbers of how many got each. Wasn't really able to find that. It's kind of limited what they like to put out into the public, keeping all their secrets. But it was reported that he threw touchdowns to Isaiah McKenzie, Gabriel Davis, Dawson Knox, and Stephon Diggs. And pretty obvious, but what I love about that is not only is it kind of projected to be what our top weapons are for the season, but it's not just, we're targeting Diggs. It's the ball's being spread around, and there's going to be games where teams really focus on taking Diggs out of the game, and we need players like Gabriel Davis and Dawson Knox to step up and make that impact. We saw it in the Chiefs game where they were hell-bent on keeping the ball out of Diggs' hands, and Gabriel Davis had a monster game. We saw it with the Patriots. Wanted to keep the ball away from Diggs. McKenzie blows up and has, I'm pretty sure it was a career game. So seeing the ability to spread the ball around and get everybody involved early in the training camp is a really good sign to me. So we were mostly focused on the offensive side of the ball there. We're going to take a quick break, come back and give you some of my notes on what we've seen on the defensive side of the ball, and maybe an interesting special teams battle. Stick around.
Hey, this is Dick DeGroat, Bill's dad. Now back to the show.
Welcome back, and thank you again for joining me on this episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast. We're going to pick up where we left off and get into just a few notes about the defense. As I kind of mentioned before, this time of year, the reporting that's out there, the video clips you get to see and everything, it's kind of, very offensive heavy, and the things you see from the defensive side of the ball, if you're not there in person, as kind of like sacks, fumbles, and interceptions, or you don't really see it. So just going to kind of pick through a little bit of the notes that I was able to get and kind of see who's making an impact early. And making an impact early, this is a guy that I know I've talked about how excited I am, how much potential I think this guy has, and he was buried behind just a myriad of high draft picks in Washington, and that's Tim Settle. And day 1, first training camp with the Bills, he comes away with a big man interception, which you absolutely love to see. Not so great for the offensive side of the ball, but to me, this says more than just him, coming down, catching the ball. And I'm glad he was able to come down with the interception, because I feel like, in particular with the big men, this is something that kind of gets overlooked a little bit. So what I'm looking at here, more than him actually getting the interception, is it's telling me that he had the presence of mind to know that he wasn't going to get his pressure on the quarterback, and he was waiting for the ball to come out, and he got his hands up and was able to come down with a pick. That's something that I think is really underrated with defensive linemen, of kind of knowing when you've lost your rep and still being able to impact the play. Whether it's just getting your hands up to kind of affect the quarterback's vision, being able to get up and bat down a pass, just kind of making it more difficult for the quarterback. So from a guy that I'm really excited to see what impact that he has on this team, great to see an early play from him. Also hearing, I guess, a ton about the defensive line in general, kind of winning a lot of the reps, getting pressures, getting would-be sacks. Also quite a few interceptions from the secondary. But Ed Oliver, by all reports, sounds like he is really flashing this training camp and kind of picking up where he left off last year. And Ed Oliver, through, I want to say, like the second half of last season, was just catching my eye so much. And, I feel like he goes a little bit under the radar because he didn't have the double-digit sacks. We've talked about this before, right? And it's hard if you're kind of just looking at a box report to be like, yeah, Ed Oliver had a great game. But there was just so much pressure created by him, and that pressure that comes right up the middle, and is able to kind of collapse the pocket with the defensive ends. If the defensive ends aren't quite there yet, making the quarterback move to the left or right, get off his spot, have to make decisions on the fly, and when you're factoring that in with Groot going to be coming off of one end, Von freaking Miller off the other, I think that pass rush might still be something that doesn't show up on the stat sheet week in and week out. I'm still not feeling like Ed Oliver's going to be a 10-sack guy this year. But if he's able to continue what he's doing and from last year kind of build upon that and really keep getting that pressure up the middle, it's going to lead to monster years for these defensive ends, some of the other guys, linebackers, defensive backs that we like to bring on blitzes. It's really going to open things up for them if the quarterback's getting off their spot and really having to make these quick decisions. It's something that I love about our defense is the way the cornerbacks kind of keep everything in front of them and are able to, jump some of these routes knowing that they have Poyer and Hyde over top of them that can kind of make up for some mistakes and whatnot. I think if we're able to get pressure in the quarterback's face right up the middle early and often, we're going to be forcing quarterbacks into early mistakes, whether it's sacks, fumbles, interceptions. And, the more possessions that you can put the ball into Josh Allen's hands, the better chance you're going to have of winning any game you put out there week in and week out. And then the last real note I had on the defense here was Kaiir Elam, and it's been pretty quiet so far as things that I've been reading, videos I've been watching. But there was a sequence, I forgot to write it down here, I believe it was day 5 of practice. The offense was doing red zone work, and we saw Kaiir Elam matching up with Stephon Diggs and had 2 consecutive pass breakups against Diggs in the red zone. And that is something that's very encouraging for me to see. Now, obviously, there's a lot more that goes into the position than winning a couple matchups. Don't get me wrong there. But for being a rookie coming into this league, we're talking Stephon Diggs, top 5, 6 receiver in the league, probably in the top 3 as far as I'm concerned for route running ability. That kind of tells me that Elam's got his head above water. He's not feeling out of place out there. I think back to the Saints game where Diggs had his footwork that just put Marshawn Lattimore in a blender. And you're talking, a Pro Bowl cornerback. And I imagine that Elam is seeing much of the same route running from Diggs on red zone plays like that. There's not really much room to really just straight up beat your man with speed or, a longer developing route. It's usually more of a couple quick moves to try to get open. So the fact that Elam is out there and not only hanging in there but making plays on one of the best receivers in the league just gives me a ton of encouragement. And the last thing I'll say in the secondary is we saw Trey White doing some work on the sidelines, and when I first read that there's a video of Trey White doing some workouts on the sidelines, I was expecting to see some light jogging, some exercise bikes, stuff like that. No, this dude is out there and he's jumping off of both legs. He looks explosive. I do think that they're going to err on the side of caution with this and make sure that he's feeling as close to 100% as possible. So I do think that he'll miss some time to start the season. But with that being said, if Kyrie Elam's out there looking like he can hold his own with Stephon Diggs, and then you're able to bring back that bona fide number one cornerback that we know we have in Trey White, and Elam is thrust into that number one spot early and kind of fast tracks his development, to me, the sky's the limit with this secondary. If you have Trey White out there, Elam's developing into what we think he can be, Taron Johnson, oh yeah, Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer over the top. This defense is going to be freaking scary, especially when you consider you add Von Miller into the pass rush, add Oliver, like I said, coming up the middle. I think this defense is really going to set offenses up to make mistakes, and on the back end, you just have awesome players in every spot that can really capitalize on teams making mistakes. So this defense that was number one overall last year, I feel like that number did get a little bit inflated last year, but with the changes and the improvements that we've made and some of these guys that are coming onto the roster and just that next step forward, I think we have a strong chance of looking at a number one defense again, and that's not something that you often see teams do 2 years in a row. The last little note I had here teased a little bit of a special teams update, and that is, and I guess kind of judging my level of concern in this punter battle that we have going on. And from what I've seen, what I've read, it seems to me like Matt Hawk kind of has the leg up right now, pun intended, on Matt Ariza, and we all know that Ariza has this monster leg and what he's able to do, if you're looking at having a really long punt and flipping the field. My concern with him going into training camp was kind of the rest of it. If you're punting from your own 40 and you're just trying to pin him deep, does he have that control? Does he have the hang time to let the coverage unit get down there? Because it's great if you can kick the ball 70 yards, but it really doesn't matter if the guy returning it has 20 yards to kind of pick his seams before the gunners can get down there and kind of force themselves into a tackle. It gets real dangerous if the return man has some room to work with and is able to pick his spots. And the other thing that we've seen is, I guess probably the even bigger concern for some people. We saw Matt Hawk struggle last year, right? And, kind of looked at Ariza as, even if he has some of those punts, it's got to be better than, some of the shanks we saw last year and whatnot. But the value that we talked about in Hawk last year was that he was a great holder. And thus far in training camp, Matt Hawk has been the only one doing the holding duties. Ariza is not doing them. So I don't know if we're looking at maybe he starts working on that a little bit later on. It's a little concerning to me that he hasn't been doing that yet. And I kind of said it in jest early in the offseason of like, what if we just kept a roster spot for a holder, with the spot this team is and the aspirations of this team. If you need a couple of clutch field goals, you can't have that getting screwed up with a botched hold or something like that. And we saw how well Tyler Bass and Matt Haught worked together last year. So I still see it as pretty unlikely, but it's starting to make me think like maybe there's a chance that Ariza ends up on the practice squad for a year. Like, would they be able to sneak him through practice squad, or would somebody try to claim him up? I guess that's something that will remain to be seen. And boy, what a luxury it is to be a Bills fan right now. That one of the biggest position battles I can look at is who's going to end up being punter number one. So good problems to have as a Bills fan. But that's going to wrap it up for tonight's episode. Thank you again for joining me. If you've made it this far and you haven't done so yet, go ahead and subscribe. We have content coming out every Monday. As we lead up to the season, probably going to pick up another episode in the week. So I want to make sure that you don't miss any of that. As I say that, like I said at the top of the show, we're going to figure out what's going on for next Monday. We'll probably put it out on social media, let you know what's going on. If we can get somebody to help us out, cover an episode, make sure you still get some content on Monday. But like I said, that's going to be determined. We'll let you know as we know. But thank you again for joining us. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you ever want to drop a comment, hear us talk about something, give some feedback on something I talked about tonight, go ahead and leave it in the comments. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, any social media, Spotify. We're everywhere. So, like I said, make sure you're dropping that subscribe. Make sure you don't miss anything from us. And we will see you again next week. Go Bills.